Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. The famous Ben Franklin quote, I think, plays a lot into the modern politics of the United States there that we are dealing with right here, right now in 2025. And today we have quite a bit to talk about, whether we're talking about the stabbing in Charlotte, which I did not get to mention last week, or the killing of Charlie Kirk, and a whole bunch of other truths, frankly, that Americans seem to be unwilling to confront the root problems with. We're going to get pretty deep today, and I apologize if this episode runs a little long. I have quite a bit to say, and I think that a lot of it is very important. Stick around with me. I think you'll gain something from this podcast, whether it is something that you love or something that you truly hate. And I'd love to hear you sound off in the comments, but without any further rambling, I am your host, Sal Asante. This is the We the Patriots podcast. And let's get right into it. A popular government without popular information, or the means of acquiring it, is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and the people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. James Madison. Folks, it is a heavy week here in the United States, and there's a lot going on. I think it makes sense to start the show with what happened to Charlie Kirk, but I really didn't plan for it to be that way. I was writing up this show in general, talking about the truths and the hard facts that, frankly, Americans are just not willing to confront. And then what happened, and made me want to do the show even more. Now, to go on to do the show without mentioning it would be a travesty in and of itself, so I'm not going to do that. But just know that I had this episode planned to be pretty much the same structure, regardless of what happened this week. So to get down to it, Charlie Kirk was assassinated this past week on September 10th, right before the celebration or the memorial of September 11th, going on the 24th anniversary of September 11th. I'm sure we all know, especially listeners of this show that are from my local area, a lot of us were personally affected or second-handed affected by the attacks on 9/11. So what happened on the precursor on the day before the memorial was a shock and was honestly a really disturbing way to be reminded of the horrors that went on September 11th, 2001. For those of you that don't know or haven't seen everything, I don't know how. It's been all over every single social media possible. But Charlie Kirk was at an event in Utah, Utah Valley University, and was shot during one of his pretty commonly held debate sessions on college campuses where he holds his positions and asks for attendees to come up and challenge him on his beliefs. He was shot in the neck, and unfortunately, I saw the video about 5-10 minutes after it had occurred. It was gory. I don't wish for anybody to have seen that video, but if you did, you know exactly what I'm saying when I say that it was pretty clear to me that he was not going to survive right away. There was updates given that he had made it to the hospital. He was in critical but stable condition. I quite honestly don't believe that. I think that he was dead very shortly after the shot, which, if there's anything good to say about this, it's good that he did not suffer long. It was a gruesome, gruesome murder, assassination, and it leads me to a lot of different points that I want to make regarding this assassination. Number one, and it's something that I have said multiple times on this podcast, and I have no fear in saying it time and time again. The access that we have nowadays with social media, specifically on X, I believe that is the least filtered version of social media that is widespread. The access that we have to gore, violence, and human suffering with no censorship is, I believe, not good. That being said, I think that it's very good to have things documented, and the video should be available for those searching for it. But with that, for those who are not searching for it, who are just scrolling down your feed and you are just seeing a man in real life getting shot and dying in front of your face. I do not think that's good. I don't think it's good for the human psyche. I do not think it's good for young people to see. As we all know, through different means or for different reasons, we've all gone to websites where there was an age consent form and we lied about the age. And I can guarantee you, although I am very much of age at this point to see gruesome content or to see adult only content, I can guarantee you that kids are doing the same thing that we did growing up, putting in a fake age in order to see stuff that they technically should not be seeing. So with that, we all know that many, many children saw this video, will be affected for the rest of their lives, as I know that I will. And I do not think it's a good thing, frankly. I know that many times, I wasn't in the VHS era. I was more onto DVDs and dark websites and all that type of stuff. But there were plenty and plenty of videos that we would go and see as kids where people were, getting hit by a car, gruesome car accidents, all this type of stuff. But you had to go and search it out. You had to go and find it. You don't just have it come across your feed as, a 12, 13, 14-year-old or even younger. And now this stuff just comes across. And I can't not help but think that this is not good for our society as a whole. Being quite blunt, I think that it is harming all of us. Types of things like specifically talking about what happened to Charlie. Those are the type of things that only veterans of war saw, that, certain police officers may see. These are not the type of things that all of society got to see on a regular basis. And we do get to see it on a regular basis. Whether you're talking about what happened to Charlie, what happened in Charlotte, there are tons of gruesome videos just everywhere now. And it is really, really disturbing. I do not think it's good. To go on to another point, I don't want to leave Charlie just yet. What's really disturbing about the online discourse about this to me is just how far out of hand it seems to have gotten. Now, to be quite truthful with all of you, there are many things that I agreed with Charlie on. There are many things that I disagreed with Charlie on. Whether you're talking about the fact that I agree to the right of life and pro-life positions that he held. I'm very much in agreement with those. You're talking about the advocacy for small government in some cases that he made. He was very much a promoter of that ideology. You're talking about family values and conservative family values and going against the movement of feminism. I was very much in support of that. Whether you're talking about standing up for free speech and defending your speech against other people trying to speak against you, very much in favor of that. He was very in favor of gun rights, which I think we all know I'm very in favor of. He was against racial equality measures like affirmative action, which I very much agree with. And he was a denier of extremism in terms of the climate and the fact that he didn't think that human beings were the main culprit. Now, there could be some agreements and disagreements. I, for one, not to be a fence sitter, but I sit somewhere in the middle on that. Whether you want to talk about carbon and all of that, I'm not really a huge purveyor of that. If you want to talk about the complete disregard of putting waste out into our environment, into our rivers, into our oceans, I'm a huge advocate of that. And I think that we have gone very, very far in the wrong direction there. So there's a little bit of disagreement there. There were some items on his agenda of being pro-life, specifically the quote that I'm sure all of you are seeing online now, where he claims or seemingly claims that he would want his daughter, even if she was underage, to carry a pregnancy to term, even if it was a rapist's baby. Very much not in agreement with that. I think that there can be caveats made out in the pro-life position for instances like rape, incest, and underage pregnancy. I think that that's true. That being said, that's a minor disagreement when it comes to it. His extreme advocacy for the state of Israel. Now, although that had massively changed over the past few months, and we'll talk about that, he was a huge supporter of Israel and in a lot of cases uses either the Bible or Western values in order to back up that position. And I vehemently disagree with him on that. And if you don't trust me on that, go listen to the last 7, 8, 10 months, maybe even a year and a half worth of episodes that I've put out that are condemning Israel for what's going on in Gaza. So although there are a lot of positions that Charlie had that I agree with, and there are some that I didn't, the point that I'm trying to bring up is, does this now make me a target of assassination? Now, of course, I didn't have the platform that Charlie had. I did not put together TPUSA events and bring together massive swaths of the younger generations in order to vote for President Trump. I didn't do that. But the broader point being that there are a lot of people that are not extremist one way or the other. And I don't believe that Charlie was an extremist either direction. There are a lot of people who hold similar points of belief, like myself. Does that put us in the target's Does that put us as a target? Does that put us in the gun's way? Because if it does, that is scary to think about. Now, that doesn't make me want to stop doing this podcast. Actually, quite the opposite. It makes me want to keep doing it, keep spreading the word. And, not that I'm a huge Charlie defender, and there are many times that I will go against President Trump where Charlie Kirk, at least publicly, would not do so. But that being said, a lot of the values that he held and espoused were things that I agree with. And that is a scary thought, to think that people like myself or other conservative influencers are going to be in the line of fire for their political views. Now, the disturbing part of that whole conversation has come out afterwards. Now, from the get-go, there were people on the right demonizing the left for what they've said, which I think has some merit, and we'll talk about that. There are people on the left claiming that Charlie Kirk deserved it, which is disgusting. But in my opinion, both sides are actually at fault there. At the end of the day, throwing blame out instead of condemning the violence whole cloth, no interruptions, no need for caveating what you're going to say, condemning the political violence is what's necessary at this point. I think that that's how we all ought to feel. Any political violence could lead to a snowball effect of more political violence and more unrest within the country. And that is not where we need to be right now in terms of getting things to a better place. Now, I will agree that a lot of times crazy moments need to happen in order for change to occur, and I would be willing to side with you. But that being said, that does not mean that we as the American people should be advocating for crazy events to happen or for crazy events to happen from our side. Whether you're talking from a conservative perspective and think conservatives should go out in the streets and riot and start killing people with opposing views, that I couldn't be any further from that position. But you could also be on the other side of things, and you are saying, from some of the things that Charlie has said, he has deserved to catch a bullet, or he should have known what was coming. And both sides, again, I think are disgusting in this, and you need to play the role of the American looking out for your country. And I think the proper position, my position that I hold in that sense, is that all political violence is bad. It's condemnable, and we need to condemn it, or it will continue to rise. And I think this is an ugly trend that we have seen, whether you're talking about the 2 assassination attempts, possibly 3, I don't really know about the third, last year on President Trump's life, whether you're talking about the less political, but still with a political message, murder of the United Healthcare CEO in the winter this past year, and whether you're talking about this assassination of Charlie Kirk. You can even go further, and I think we should go further and mention the 2 Democratic lawmakers, might have been one, don't have the exact facts on that right in front of me, but apologize if I'm getting it wrong. I believe it was 2 Democratic lawmakers who were killed earlier this year. No mention from the media, really, and no mention from President Trump. All of this needs to be condemned, and part of that whole problem, I truly believe, regardless of who committed this, right? We don't need to fight a fight of, oh, this person who killed Charlie was on the left. Oh, this person who killed Charlie was a far-right extremist. At the end of the day, it does not matter. He was killed for what he does, what he's speaking. And what he was speaking was trying to have that conversation, have that free speech, truly bored out as it's meant to be in a debate setting in order to have your views challenged by speech, and he was killed for it. Again, does not matter who did it. Doesn't matter from what side that person was. It needs to be condemned. But I think a large portion of the problem is the extremist rhetoric that all sides are resorting to. And, I pride myself on not going that far to call everybody on the left of me a commie and everybody to the right of me a Nazi. You need to take apart what people are saying at face value and hold them to their word. If they're a liar, they're a liar. But, if they are far to the left and they are espousing views that are leaning near socialism, call them a socialist or a democratic socialist. You don't need to call them a communist unless they outwardly say they're a communist. And the same thing goes to the other side. President Trump may be considered far right, which I'll tell you right now, he's actually not, but he may be considered far right, but to call him a Nazi, he hasn't really ever even come close to showing or saying that he is a Nazi or does anything like that. So to call him a Nazi repeatedly, to call Charlie Kirk a Nazi, to say that, the United Healthcare CEO is the devil because he rejects claims, you're going so far to one side or the other, you as in the people, not you directly listening to this. I apologize if you took it that way. But you're taking things so rhetorically far that it's hard to come back from. And if anybody who either has the motivation, I guess courage, I don't know if courage is the right word to use there, generally speaking, that's a positive thing, has the wherewithal, the means to do something about it, talking about violence, and act upon the words that you're saying, they just might. As we've seen again with assassination attempts on President Trump, the assassination of the CEO of United Healthcare, or assassination of the two lawmakers earlier this spring, or Charlie Kirk himself. We've seen people take the actions that words have possibly led to, and I think that if we cannot calm down the rhetoric in order to have a genuine conversation, this goes to both sides. This is not one side who is condemnable for this type of speech. If we cannot tone it down and have a realistic conversation while still allowing yourself to be, I would say, rightfully upset, if you cannot tone down your language to include everybody into the possible amount of people that you would talk to, then I think maybe you shouldn't be putting your views out there. And I mean that honestly. I do my best. And again, not to say that I have a massive platform, but I do respect you as the audience wholeheartedly. And I think that you should be given the information as true as possible. If I make a mistake, I'm going to correct it. But I would never even close to lead someone out to be a massive extremist unless they may have said so themselves, unless the views that they hold are truly extremist, unlike that of which of a Charlie Kirk. It's gotten to a point now where it is dangerous. It is dangerous to put your words out there because you never know who may listen to it. And I take great pride and respect to put out words that I think are worth hearing. Now, what I think it all culminated to in terms of the Charlie Kirk situation is the heart-wrenching video of his wife Erica coming out and giving quite a long and devoted speech the other night. Again, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going and watching that. It's not gruesome. There are some points in that speech where the anger is definitely coming out, and I think even at times she may have fallen into that trap that I just referenced not 2 minutes ago, saying that you are putting certain people to an extreme or another. There are many times that the word they is used and not explained. But when you're looking at the situation, at the end of the day, this is a woman who lost her husband and is now going to be raising two young children by herself. And there are a lot of people who took the opportunity when seeing that video to attack her online and to demonize her when in reality she didn't really go that far. She was upset, and I think rightfully so, but came out in a moment where her husband had many, many followers. TPUSA is a very large organization, and I think that she did commendably well. She really put out a heartfelt message, and I think that it was felt. For her to get attacked, for Charlie to be attacked posthumously, where realistically most of the accusations are just blatant lies. Text clipping is not even a good enough example because people are knowingly taking out the context that explains the clip itself, and using that in order to bolster their claims that he's a terrible person, that he's a racist, that whatever claims they're making, there's tons of them out there. And you can find them in about 2 minutes if you're going to scroll Twitter or Instagram or whatever far enough. My whole point in bringing all of this up is that this violence does not and should not, does not need to and should not continue in the United States, and we need to tamper down the temperature a little bit. Now, there are some theories that are going out about what happened to Charlie, and I think if I get to them, I'll get to them at the end of the show because I think they're important to talk about, but we will see how far we run. I have already talked about this longer than I wanted to, but I do want to leave you with a quote that I think is pretty useful in this exact moment, and that is a quote by Bernard Shaw, and that says that assassination is the extreme form of censorship. And another one by Eric Amber: the important thing to know about an assassination or an assassination attempt is not who fired the shot, but who paid for the bullet. And I will end that section here. I want to move on to this attack in Charlotte that I was not able to talk about last week. I believe before I recorded the show, the event had already occurred. I did not see too much of it, or I was hitting the publish button and it was out. Basically, what had happened is a many-time former criminal, repeat offender, as we would say, attacked a woman on the train. This woman was actually a Ukrainian refugee from what I saw, and attacked her with a knife and fled with a bloody knife. The most disturbing part of the entire scene was the fact that this woman, sitting there in agony, dripping in her own blood, was surrounded by many, many people, and nobody did a thing. And that is really disturbing to me, aside from the fact of the criminality aspect and the race differences, which I think we'll talk about in a minute here. I just want to focus on that. Our society has become a bystander society, whether it is afraid to jump in, whether it is afraid to defend someone who's being bullied by fear of being bullied or picked on yourself. That has become the epitome of living socially in the United States. And I mean, even think about what happened to Daniel Petty. I believe this was last year when he basically defended the train from a mentally sick person threatening to hurt the whole train. And in the course of events, that person died under the restraint of Daniel Petty, and he was put to trial. These examples that are not hugely numerous, but there are definitely multiple cases of, continue to pile up and give examples for people not wanting to intervene. And I think this is the society that we have now created for ourselves as Americans. Now, another big portion of this that I think needs a big spotlight on it is the actual perpetrator in this crime in Charlotte. Now, the person who did this crime, let's see if I could pull up his name. And of course, I'm getting inundated with a ton of ads. I can't even scroll down. Okay. The perpetrator, DeCarlos Brown, who murdered the poor woman, who, of course, now I have more ads stopping me from seeing the name of. I'm going to mess this name up, so I apologize, but Irina Zarutska, and this was the Ukrainian refugee, as I had mentioned. But this perpetrator has many issues. Number one, there is a race difference, which I think is something that we need to focus on if we want to get to some sort of a solution of a problem. I'm not a racist. I'm not a racialist. I'm not someone who proposes that any legislation should be made across or made to define racial lines. I think that is wrong. There is something that is wrong with the statistics of violent crimes, however, and I think that needs to be pointed out. That being that when you talk about the difference in terms of murder rate or non-negligent manslaughter attacks, that would be 13% of the population, that being Black Americans, account for over 50% of those crimes. That in and of itself is a scary statistic, and it's something that I think needs to be paid attention to. But there's actually a further, I think, defining feature, and one that actually makes sense to bring up in this case that's not along black or white lines, and that is the fact that the recidivism, the repeated offenders of these crimes makes up a large majority of the crimes. It's something like 52 to 60% of all violent crimes are committed by previous offenders. Now, that does not mean that they previously did violent crimes. They are criminals previously. They've already been booked and they come out and they do these things. And that is the case here with DeCarlos Brown. DeCarlos had previously been arrested for possession of a firearm. He was charged with robbery with a deadly weapon, holding, I believe, I could be wrong here, I'm not seeing it on this page. I just know that he had quite a long rap sheet. I believe 12 previous offenses. I believe he was in possession of illegal drugs. So there are many, many issues to be brought up. And again, I think one of them being the fact that there is a giant disparity in the race committing violent crimes. And again, not only that, but the repeat offenders that are committing these types of violent crimes, and both need to be brought up. And they are statistics that are very, very rarely brought up, if ever, by mainstream news outlets or mainstream purveyors of news. Even mainstream providers that are on podcast platforms do not generally talk about things like this. I think it's very important if we're not going to solve these issues. Think about the amount of times where if there was a black on white crime, that it would be reported across all news outlets immediately, whether you're talking about something like the Trayvon Martin case or the George Floyd case, numerous other cases that went on over the past couple of decades that got national attention. But any time that it was the other way around, you don't really see it. Actually, this most recent attack in Charlotte is one of the only times. And I think that the blatant censorship of these events that go the other way by the mainstream news networks goes to show the lack of knowledge that is held that these attacks do happen at a much higher rate coming from the other side. And if that's not being paid attention to, that's not being reported on, people don't know the statistics. A lot of times either you're having a debate and somebody is just utterly wrong because they're not put forth with the facts, or you have issues like the public not being aware and carrying on about their day, putting themselves into dangerous situations. These are all things that I think America is afraid to face the truth on, and that is going to be the highlight of the rest of this show. Different facts, different things that Americans are not really taking into account and are not truly getting to the root of the problem. And a big root of this problem that happened in Charlotte for sure, is that this person was allowed to roam free after already committing a violent crime, and that is, of course, robbery with a deadly weapon. I think something to be considered, and I think something that was mentioned on Matt Walsh's show earlier this week, and possibly last week, was that we as a society, we in America, we are not prosecuting violent crimes strong enough. And I think that's clear when you're looking at the increase in the amount of violent crimes being committed. Doesn't matter if you're talking about cities or you're talking about more rural areas or somewhere in between, somewhere in the suburbs. Violent crimes have gone up quite a bit over the past few decades. And I think a big part of that is not prosecuting these crimes strong enough. There are a lot of times where extremely violent action is taken and the person is claiming to be in a mental state that is not allowing them to be prosecuted. And I think that's not fair to society. It does not much matter what mental state or what mental issues you're going through. If you kill someone, if you put someone in danger, if you're going to rob someone at gunpoint, you deserve, in my opinion, to be put into prison for quite some time. Not a 3 to 5 year sentence, but probably more like 15 to 20 years. And in some cases, especially with the death of another person, 20 plus years to life, I think, is the minimum. And not having any sort of penalty that dissuades someone from committing the crime is honestly allowing it, aiding and abetting it almost. And I think that is a failure on our society. Another one to talk about is the disparity in mass shootings. Now, I want to caveat this by saying that I'm not talking about gang violence. And if you bring in gang violence, which is a problem in and of itself, these statistics that I'm about to bring up are massively changed. Now, that being said, what's going on with mass shootings is a disparity going in the other direction when talking about race. Okay, so I'm not hating on one race or the other. I think everybody deserves to get whacked on the head when you have the statistics pointing in one direction or the other. And the honest truth is that the large majority of mass shooters, again, not talking about gang violence, the large majority of mass shooters are white. Over 50% are white, and still coming up, surprisingly, that 20% are Black, and then 9% Latino, 7% Asian, 4% Middle Eastern. At the end of the day, the biggest problem, I think, that we could all widely agree on is that the majority of mass shooters are white. And not only that, they can be broken down into another group, which I will go back and correct myself on the other statistic that I brought up. But almost all of these are men. And that doesn't matter if you're talking about mass shooters or you're talking about violent crimes in general. When you're talking about the high rate of violent crimes, or more so murders, and the non-negligent manslaughters that I brought up earlier, 51% of them being committed by Black Americans, the honest truth is that for a majority of those, I don't have the stat in front of me, I believe it's over 90%, might even be above 95%, not exactly sure, but they're committed by Black males, which is an even smaller portion of the population, something around 6%. With that being the case, there's something going on when it comes to the males in our society. And I think when you're looking at the root causes of this, there can be many. When you look into this and you try to find things, whether you're talking about just the direct murder rate, or you're looking at the mass shooting perpetrators, honestly, the groups tie in a lot together. A lot of these people have previous trauma that has not been treated whatsoever, has not been acknowledged. A lot of these people don't have a well put together home. Either they're missing a father or a mother, or there's constant fighting at home. What I found to be a surprise in my research was that drugs do not play a high percentage role in this. And I wasn't thinking things along the lines of like cocaine or meth. I was thinking more along the lines of psychotropic drugs or gender affirming drugs, whether you're talking about hormones or what have you. At the end of the day, those only make up about 20% of mass shooters. I don't know about general murders, but only about 20%. So the causes are actually more deeply ingrained than even I would have assumed. Going into this, I was expecting my research to show me that drugs had a lot to do with this. And at the end of the day, they just don't. So what plays more? Again, generally males. I believe it's, so I'm seeing a source saying about 97, 98% of mass shooters are males. Over 80% are in a noticeable crisis. 31 to 50% have experienced severe childhood trauma. A lot of them have undiagnosed mental issues, whether you're talking about depression, anxiety. Very rarely are you seeing psychosis, which a lot of people would have thought linked them to doing something, as egregious as a mass shooting. And the crazy part, especially with mass shooters, I don't know about murderers again. Crazy part is that roughly 50 to 70% of them showed suicidal intent, ideation, or behaviors during or after the attack, and possibly even before. 63% of these people that committed mass shootings had a prior history of violence, 30% of those being domestic violence. 40 to 50 to 60%, my apologies, 50 to 60% of these people leaked out and communicated their plans, communicated their threats, either to family, friends, online, into message boards, much like the shooter of Charlie Kirk. Now, almost 80% of them obtained guns legally. So when you look at all of these different factors, it's hard to pick out one that shows, a high linkage to all of these. And again, most of these stats that I just mentioned are strictly about mass shooters and not pertaining to general murderers or violent crime being committed. When you talk about this, I think the biggest ones obviously to link is that males are obviously having issues in terms of fitting into society and not causing these. And a lot of these people, whether you're talking about strictly mental health issues or suicidal ideation, a lot of these people have mental issues that are either being taken care of poorly, in the sense that 20% of the mass shooters are on some sort of either psychotropic or gender affirming drug. That leaves a lot of people out there who are just dealing with unattended to mental issues. Now, what can we do with that information? Well, I think that it is important to destigmatize. And I do not mean to be the wokey liberal out here saying that we all need to focus on our mental health. It is important. If you are not getting the help you need, if you feel like you are in a bad situation, either mentally or in your life generally, and you are not seeking help and you are just living in your despair, you are living in that depression, there's a good chance that you are going to harm yourself or someone else. And we really, as a society, do not do a great job of giving people the resources that they need without judgment. And I think that's the biggest part. People do have access to resources nowadays. The biggest part is that they do not have access to them without judgment. A lot of times females do. I think that can kind of point to why 98% of mass shooters are male. A lot of females have access, and there is no stigma associated whatsoever with seeking that help. With males, there is. And I think that it's very important that we as a society get to a better place when it comes to that, in not only allowing the males to have access to the help, especially mental health help that they need, but not condemning them for doing so, not making them less of a possible partner, not making them, less of an employee. They seek the help that they needed, should be commendable, should not be condemned. I think that's very important moving forward. But if we're not going to get to the root of these issues, and again, correct ourselves when we're wrong, like I was going into this thinking that, I have a feeling that drugs are a big part of this. If we're not going to find the real problems, then we're not open to the actual facts, I should add. we're not going to find a solution to these problems. You know, if you turn on to something like CNN, I'll use them as a punching bag right now. Don't worry, Fox, you're next. Turn on to CNN and it's just after a school shooting. It's always ban the guns and white men are the problem. You turn it into Fox News, all you're going to see is it's the transgenders and it's these gender pills. None of them are talking about the mental health crisis that we have in this country. None of them are talking about the fact that anybody could commit a crime with a knife, with a baseball bat. They're talking about things that are not actually, in my opinion, a part of the problem. Guns have existed for centuries. They've been around a long time. They've been legal, allowed by the Constitution in the United States since its founding. We've been dealing with mass shootings for the past 30 some odd years. It's a pretty recent phenomenon. Mental health, the more and more that we open this up, and this is a real question, has nothing to do with the drug part. The more and more that we open up mental health to the public and try to make it a viable option, the more and more it seems to be causing problems. Now, I don't know about the linkage of that. I don't know if that is due to our inability to properly handle situations or if it is improper diagnosis, if it is a little bit of a hypochondriac assorted behavior. Whether it's a combination of all this, we are seeing people have less and less success mentally with more and more treatments available. There's something to that. You could also make a point too that the mental health services are catered a lot more to women. Women see a lot more success than men. That is very, very possible. And I'm sure, I don't have the statistics in front of me, I'm sure the statistics bear that out a little bit, in which males do not see it as positive as women do. That is a problem. You know, when it comes to, again, going back on Fox here, blaming it all on the transgenders when in reality they make up, I think, less than 1% of the entire population. I think they make up of less than 1%, if not even less than 0.5% possibly of mass shooters. And you go out and you're going to blame that or blame the death of Charlie Kirk on a transgender person before the facts are in, might I add. You can go on and on with this. My whole point being that we are not diagnosing the real problem, right? And that goes for basically everything I want to talk about today. I want to continue along the same lines when it comes to transgenderism. As Americans, we have for the past roughly 8 to 10 years, we have promoted this ideology and we have this very big group called the LGBTQIA plus, I don't know the whole acronym nowadays. We have a whole community dedicated to basically people who do not conform to normal sexuality. And a big part of that nowadays is transgenderism. You will get bashed on the head for not supporting these people who are transgender or transitioning properly. You'll get bashed on the head for not using the correct pronouns. You'll get bashed on the head for saying that they probably shouldn't have access to care that they conclude as gender affirming. At the end of the day, I am honestly in agreement with the opposite of that. I do not think we should be in support generally as a society of people mutilating their bodies. I do not think whatsoever that we should be in support of children having access to this medical, I don't want to call it care because I don't think it's caring for them whatsoever, medical intervention. I think that we're not being honest with ourselves about the problem. And part of the problem is that even as was quoted by doctors years ago, it's called a DSM-5, whatever it is, in the list of mental health issues, mental illnesses that they had, gender dysphoria was one of those. It is no longer termed as a mental illness. Even if it is not treated like any other mental illness, where when you have a mental illness, you are attempting to, in some cases, lower the symptoms in order for you to live in everyday life. And if not directly treat the disease and hopefully make it go away, whether you're talking about something like anxiety, depression. In the case of gender dysphoria and people who are claiming to be transgender, we are aiding them in their mental illness. I am not in support of that. Now, if you are above the age of 18 and you are your own person, you can do whatever you want. You know, you see grown women going and getting fake boobs. You see them going and getting the BBLs. You see people getting fat loss surgery. I don't think it should be any different for someone who's transgender. If you want to go and do that, you know, that's on you. The biggest problem is what we're teaching our children as right and what we are allowing children to have access again through the medical community. If you are to allow that, if you are to say that it is normal and it is not a mental illness, it's not a disease, well, you are, again, that aiding and abetting thing comes back into play here. And I think us as Americans, there's half of the country that would probably agree with what I'm saying. There's another half of the country that would want me dead, or at least being publicly insulted on whatever platform it may be for saying what I'm saying. But the honest truth is that I don't believe I'm wrong here. I would have to be put forth with a lot of facts to show that the suicide rates among this community, amongst the transgender community, before or after operations being done or medical intervention, that they're not massively higher than the general population, because they are. And that would lead me to suggest that there is a mental illness behind this. We are not being honest about it as a society. And I think that that is to our own detriment as a society. We're losing part of our society here. Another thing, and getting away from the mental health aspects, because I think that is a huge thing in America that we're not taking seriously and not giving its true credence. Something that came around towards the end of last week, I believe, before I was able to make our show. It came out after I was able to make our show, I believe, was this thing going around on all of the right-leaning meme pages, I want to say, on Instagram. I believe Andrew actually sent me this. And it was that there's a lot of talk about abolishing property taxes. And specifically in Florida, they are looking to do this. He was asking my opinion, and I want to give my honest opinion to you all. Property taxes are a state level tax. They are not a federal level tax. So keep that in mind. It's not like the income tax. It's not like payroll taxes. It's not like that. It is a state level tax, much like sales tax. That being said, I think it acts in the same way when I say the hard truth about it. And the hard truth is that I think we as Americans are all in favor of reducing tax. There are some taxes that are going to have to be paid federally. There are some taxes that are going to have to be paid to your state, to your locality, what it happens. Removing property taxes sounds great. And especially you can make the caveat that there should be no property taxes being paid once you've paid off your home. Okay, I can get with that. I get the idea. There is a very large issue though. If you are to reduce the taxes being brought in, whether at the state level, federal level, whatever level you want to talk about, if you are reducing taxes and you are not reducing the level of spending, then you have an issue. Take away those taxes, you really have two solutions there. So if you were to take away, we will use the property tax because that's the one that comes up. You were to take away the property tax. Okay, well, the federal government's not getting any less money, so there's no issue there. Now, you are to take away the property tax. The state is going to have less money coming in as revenue. I think we can all agree at that level that there's an issue there. State's taking in less money. Have they agreed to spend less money? Well, in many cases, I believe Florida being the only one that I can think of that has reduced spending a little bit over the past couple decades, and I don't think it's by much, but has reduced spending a little bit. They brought in money in other ways, so that's fair. But really, nowhere is reducing spending, especially at the federal level. So if you're going to remove a tax, like property tax, you're not going to reduce the spending. You now have two solutions. Number one, raise the taxes in another taxing area. All right. You could talk about something like registering your car in Florida is a type of tax that goes to the state. And for them, registering a car compared to up in New Jersey is significantly more expensive. It's kind of part of the trade-off that you have when you have no state income tax and much lower property taxes. That is the trade-off. You're going to pay higher fees on certain things. Okay. You could raise that even more if you remove the property tax. Fair. You could start to add another tax, which could be, in Florida's case, a state income tax, which I'm sure none of the residents would be in support of. You could raise something like sales tax, which I think we all already feel that enough. You kind of have another option that's outside of raising taxes in another area in order to solve for the issue of not having enough revenue. And that is the issue that we all don't like talking about, and that is to print more money, to inflate the currency. Unfortunately, that has been the go-to way of survival, not at the state level because the states don't print the money, at the federal level. For the past 30 to 40 years, anytime there is an issue in covering our payments, anytime we are struggling to make whatever we have to pay, we just print more money. What does that do? I think all of you intelligent people out there know exactly where I'm going. you are leading to inflation. We have seen so much inflation over the past 6 years, ever since COVID, that our money is now worth about half of what it started at before COVID. So, when I go back to the original question posed by Andrew or posed by any of you other people who are interested on what my take on removing a property tax would be, again, that would be at a state level, but if there is not a simultaneous proposal to reduce the spending, I don't really care for you removing the property tax because I know it's going to come out of my paycheck in one way or another. Again, either it's from income taxes, sales taxes, it's going to come out in terms of inflation. I would rather you just keep it the same. And that goes to our federal spending level as well. We talked earlier this year about Trump's proposal to remove taxes on overtime, tax on tips. You do all of this stuff. If you are not proposing to lower the federal spending, you're not lowering the budget, then you are just promising to me and to all the rest of us here in America that you're going to print more money and inflate our currency even more than it already is. And if we can't come to grips with that difficult fact here in the United States, then we're never going to get to a place where we are fiscally responsible. And I honestly don't think that we will. I would need someone to change my mind on that. Continuing on the bad politicians and bad political decisions, not so much Kirk cultural, I think that it is hard for us to face the fact that our politicians are generally criminals. Whether you want to talk about people like Joe Biden, whether you want to talk about Donald Trump, whether you want to talk about basically everybody in Trump's cabinet, everybody in Biden's cabinet, everybody in Obama's cabinet, a lot of times these people have committed very dark crimes and we will never see them for the light of day. And for us not being willing, the Epstein case is the most gruesome, and this ties back to what we originally talked about today, and that is what happened with Charlie Kirk. For us not willing, as the American people, to hold our politicians' feet to the fire, all the way up to the highest level in Donald Trump. If we're not going to hold their feet to the fire when it comes to this Epstein case, we're never going to see the facts on anything that is heinous that's being committed by anybody. So why does this tie back into what happened to Charlie Kirk? Well, the Senate was voting on the allowance of releasing the Epstein files, forcing them through. I believe it was pushed by the Democrats and possibly pushed by Rand Paul. But what ended up happening was 3 hours after the confirmed death, roughly around 3 hours after the confirmed death of Charlie Kirk, the Senate voted to not allow those files to be released. Oddly, along political lines. Now that raises a couple of questions in and of itself. Number one, did everybody going into it already know, so they made it a show to make it seem like they wanted to know? Because I can guarantee you there's people on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, and maybe not necessarily senators, but people very high up in both parties that are implicated by the Epstein case. It is based on the numerous stories and accounts that we've heard over the past couple of decades on Jeffrey Epstein. Or is it the Republican Party? And I think it's either that, they got together and made it a show, or is there enough people in the Republican Party who are trying to protect those like Donald Trump and others implicated that are currently in the administration and save them from that? Well, as disturbing as it is, I think that both are very possible. And this is where I lead to say that basically all of our politicians are criminals. A lot of our leaders are criminals. It spans across the globe. You had Prince Andrew, I believe, stuck up in the Epstein case. You have people all over the world that are caught up in the Epstein case. He leads into the leadership of Mossad and the Israeli government. So when you talk about all of these all-encompassing things, just the Epstein case is just one little case that you have to talk about. Very clearly points out that a lot of our leadership and a lot of our politicians are criminally liable and they're not getting held accountable. And that is a hard truth to face as Americans because I think deep down we all know it. Now, last thing that I want to talk about is kind of bringing it back to our original statement, and that is that political violence is a guarantee if the demonization of both sides continues. Whether you want to call somebody a Nazi, whether you want to call someone a communist, however far you want to go is going to be the limit of not only the speech, but it's going to be a limit of the action. You have to think about it. How many times were you asked the question growing up, if you had a chance to go back in time and kill Hitler before he did anything, would you do it? And you were looked at as a bad person if you were not willing to kill Hitler. Well, imagine saying there's a modern day Hitler. In that sense, you're talking about a Nazi. If you're willing to go out on a limb and say that someone's a Nazi, aren't you also damn near, if not explicitly, calling for their death? Right? I think that this is it's a truth that I think deep down we all know. And I think that it's very hard to get across to the right people to hear it because, listen, there is a part of the media that you have to understand, we have to understand as American people, they are profiting off of the outrage. They are profiting off of us yelling at each other and throwing slime at each other, saying, no, Charlie Kirk shooter, he was a leftist. No, he was what do they call it? A groiper. He was a Nick Fuentes guy, whatever. And back and forth and back and forth. Who profits off that? The media. The outrage, the shock reporting that continues to come out day after day. They're making money off us, people. If we're not willing to realize that and tone down our own rhetoric, guys, this stuff is going to continue to happen and we have to put an end to it. There are people like the United Healthcare CEO who lost his life because he was doing his job. I talked about this originally when this came out, but the honest truth of the matter is that in that case, that man is not the one making the decisions. That guy is running the business. He is trying to hire and fire the right people, make the public statements. He is not the one at the end of the day looking at your case saying, this guy has pancreatic cancer and he's definitely going to die, so it's not worth us to give him the money. Denied. It's not him. It's a whole board of people who are much more well-read in terms of medical conditions, people who have ideas of what they're doing, and yet people killed him anyway because they thought the company was dirty. And that may be true. You don't kill the guy for it. You push for his ousting. You publish documents. You do whatever you have to do behind the scenes in order to get him out. You don't kill the guy. And that is where we've resorted. Now we have attempts on Donald Trump. Again, the Minnesota lawmakers that lost their life. Charlie Kirk. It seems to be continuing, and it will continue to happen until we dial down the temperature and the volume of these crazy takes. And I'm hoping that that's what I can give to you guys. I'm hoping that, by no means am I looking to pick up the followers of Charlie Kirk. I think we probably have some agreements and some differences. If you want to join on, great. But I'm not looking to profit off of his death like many, many mainstream outlets or even people like Ben Shapiro are. And with that mentioned, how disgusting was that? I'm getting into the conspiracy zone here, so if you want to tune out. I know it's been a long show. I do not blame you. So let me get into the conspiracy zone here. I found it really, really disturbing, the comments that came out by Ben Shapiro and the actions taken by Ben Shapiro the days and honestly hours after the Charlie Kirk shooting. In one instance, he is quoted as saying, "We will pick up the bloody microphone" from Charlie Kirk. Disturbing to hear. Honestly, disturbing to hear. And not only that, it is alleged, I have not seen confirmed proof from Ben Shapiro himself, but it has been alleged by many notable outlets, check marks on Twitter type of people, that Ben Shapiro is now going to be the head of the TPUSA platform. That in and of itself is extremely disturbing. Number one, it was very much based on Christian values, had nothing to do with Judaism. And I think that's important to point out. There are a lot of organizations that represent the values of Jewish people in media, and there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, if that's what it's held to, even if they are pro-America, which I think is questionable for Ben Shapiro. I think that he says a lot of things that are more pro-Israel than pro-America. But that being said, this is not the place for him to do it, and yet it seems like this is the direction that it's going, and it is very sad. Another thing that is disturbing to me in the entirety of all of this, all of what happened with Charlie. And again, I'm getting conspiratorial and it's basically all about Charlie Kirk. So something that was very, very disturbing to me was, there's a few things really. Number one, Netanyahu allegedly came out and made a statement about what happened before President Trump. How he had that information, nobody really knows. Number two, Trump posted a photo, him and Kirk, and behind them is okay, anyway, sorry about that. President Trump posted a photo of him and Kirk, AI generated, which is really weird. And behind them is an American and an Israeli flag. And for some reason, I don't really know this individual, Rabbi Shlomo, his name is on the bottom of RIP Charlie Kirk, or Charlie Kirk, you will be missed, something like that. Very disturbing. On top of that, what is the most disturbing, I would say, of all of it, is Benjamin Netanyahu getting on, I believe it was Newsmax, could have been Fox News, could have been both, getting out and claiming that he was not involved, the Israeli government was not involved in the murder of Charlie Kirk. Why are you even saying that? That is so disturbing to think about. And honestly, makes me, and I think many others, concerned that there was a possible linkage here. And I know I'm not alone here. There was an interview done by Tim Dillon. And Tim Dillon, of course, is not a political commentator that is going out looking to be the truth purveyor. That's not necessarily what he's going for. But he clearly was disturbed by the killing of Charlie Kirk, and he had on a reporter, and I think this reporter was very insightful. I had been thinking on my own that there was a possibility that there's a linkage here, and it's disturbing to think about, and I'm not throwing accusations out there. I think it's something that needs to be thought of. There is a disturbing linkage between the possibility of Israel calling a hit on Charlie Kirk. Why? Well, from my understanding, again, I'm not a huge follower of Charlie Kirk. There are some disagreements, especially in terms of what was going on with Israel. And what happened, in my eyes, this is not the reporter, I'll get to that. In my eyes, what happened was he had Dave Smith on for a debate with Josh Hammer about 2 months ago. Dave Smith was very good, and I am a fan of Dave Smith's. Not everything he says is great, just like everybody else. I'm sure there are plenty of people who have things to pick bones about what I say. Totally understood, and that's fair. Point being is, I like Dave Smith. I like a lot of what he has to say, especially in terms of talking about what's going on with Israel and Gaza right now. So he had a debate with Josh Hammer, performed very well. Charlie Kirk was, I think, pretty objectively speaking, from my own point of view, he was leaning towards wanting to support Josh, but in a lot of cases could not, even though he was the moderator of the debate. Ever since that moment, from what I've seen, again, I have not been following Charlie Kirk, so I don't know all of everything that has been coming out. He has gone down a road of questioning the actions of Israel much, much more than he has in the past. This is very interesting. Whether you're talking about what's going on in Gaza, whether you're talking about what happened previously, and now I switch it over to what this interview between Tim Dillon and having Max Blumenthal on the show. Blumenthal goes through this whole article that he is writing, and he is writing from a perspective of the left. He is not a fan of Charlie Kirk, but has been allegedly following him for years. And so what he says is that this buildup of anxiety has been happening for quite some time now, for years. There had been many of Charlie's supporters who'd come out, and were supporters, but would question him and hammer him over the head with things on Israel, whether you're talking about the USS Liberty attacks, the previous false flag attacks, people in Israel, including Netanyahu himself, claiming that something like 9/11 was a good thing for Israel. And according to Blumenthal, he being Charlie, would shut down these debates pretty quickly. And that is until what happened recently with Dave Smith. So he starts entertaining this and going through and having a lot of different videos and seemingly changing beliefs on the subject, which is a good thing, especially if you're someone from my point of view where I do not support whatsoever Israel's actions being taken in Gaza or across the world over the past few years. It's a good thing to see someone like Charlie Kirk, who is a massive public supporter of Israel, starting to change his tune. What comes out? About a month before, again, according to Blumenthal, about a month before, Carson Smith, I believe he's a contributor over at InfoWars, so Alex Jones' site that I just bashed a week or two ago, claiming that he is a source, close friend of Charlie Kirk's, claiming that he being Charlie, is afraid of going against Israel, afraid for his own life. Now, what had been at least publicly known is that there was large fights that started between Charlie Kirk and a lot of his donors. A lot of his donors are very, very wealthy Jewish men, even in the billionaire status. He was getting into fights over funding, over his views, not putting out the right views, saying they're going to pull their funding if he does not stand up for Israel more so. And a lot of this, obviously, in the light of what just happened, is quite disturbing to think about. Israel does have a past of having access to people across the world and being able to enact assassination attempts where you wouldn't even think they could possibly get. Whether you're talking about South America, in Europe, they're everywhere. And it's not crazy to think I would say, in my opinion, and again, I'm not accusing them of doing this. I am merely saying that this is a conspiracy worth being investigated. And it's disturbing to say that. Now, we obviously have, at this point of the show releasing, we have the shooter in custody. Now they got 3 shooters, and this one seems to be the real one. There is quite a bit of information pointing in many different directions. Family's a conservative. He seems to be a leftist. He's got a transgender boyfriend. He's fitting a lot of narratives. At the end of the day, what it seems to be is a division in America. Whoever set out for this seems to have wanted to hurt America. This is disturbing. And I would go as far to say that it would make sense, possibly, for Israel to do this. So keep an eye out for more details on that. That is the end of my conspiracy rant. This show has gone on for over an hour. I don't know how long the edited version is going to be, but I apologize for taking up so much of your time. But this week has been a crazy week. It has gone so far sideways. Whether you're talking about what happened in Charlotte, what happened to Charlie Kirk, the inability, in my opinion, for Americans to face the real facts, whether you're talking about the differences in racial perpetrators of different kinds of violence. Again, whether you're talking about just the murder rate, when we talked about the really high percentage of Black people committing those crimes, or whether you're talking about the mass shootings without gang violence that are massively perpetrated by whites. All of them pretty much on both sides of that aisle being the males. What kind of issues we have there, not being able to face the facts that we have many, many underlying issues that are not being taken seriously. Whether you're talking about the fact that a lot of people in this country believe that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, or we're talking about the inability to understand that taxes need to be taken and our spending needs to be curtailed. All of these different things are so important to me, and the fact that we're not taking them seriously and allowing something like Charlie Kirk shooter is a tranny and Charlie Kirk shooter is a right-wing fascist, and that's what's swallowing up our minds as Americans, that disappoints me, and I think that we can do better. That's all I got for you today. This is We the Patriots podcast. I'm Sal Sante. I'll catch you.
I wish I were the fucking state. I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.